My name is Karen Huaulme. I'm a developer advocate here at MongoDB. I've been at MongoDB almost 3 years. So I actually spent my whole career in gaming. I was at NVIDIA and I was at Amazon and I was at Twitch before, and I might talk about these things. It's actually funny because when I was in gaming, I thought it was so exciting and that databases would be the most boring thing ever. But now I'm in data and I actually love it because you get to see so many different types of applications and so many different ways that people use data to sort of iterate and make their applications better, make the user experiences better. So today I'm going to talk about GraphQL. And I'll talk about how it actually, let me see if I can move my screen here. So I actually, before I talk about GraphQL, I just want to say, if you've seen any of my presentations before, I do a talk about search, and in it, I love Italy. So my first husband's German, my final husband's French, but I really, really, really love Italy. And I give this talk about search, and in it, I don't have any, I build up a FIFA team, and on the FIFA team, I don't let Italians on it, but it's not because I don't like Italians. It's because the Italian team beat both Germany and France on the way to the 2006 World Cup, and it hurt my feelings. So I actually did get in trouble for saying that, for not letting Italians on the team, but it's just a joke. I actually really like Italian soccer. So I've been to Italy many times. This is my family. We've been Rome and whatever. 3 years ago this month, this picture at the bottom is my brother-in-law. He's also French, and his American wife, and they got married in Sorrento, and we had a meal that was 25 courses in this restaurant off of a castle in the ocean. It was incredible. So I love Italian food. Everybody loves Italian food, of course. You can't tell your French family that you'd really rather move to Italy. That didn't go over well. But one of my favorite memories of Italy, real quickly, I just want to say this because I'm from Texas and lots of us don't really get out of the country, but the picture on the top is from St. Moritz in Switzerland. It was the end of July, so I'm a paragliding pilot, in case anybody paraglides. It's super fun, and you could do it in Italy. But I took off that glacier at the top of St. Moritz, and the X-Alps was going on, if anybody knows what the X-Alps is. I think that's the Finnish pilot. But we flew for 4 hours that day, and it looked like, the clouds are above us, and you look like you just take off and land, but we flew for 4 hours, and we landed by that waterfall. And I didn't know where we were. And so I asked in English, and I asked in French, and I asked in German, and nobody understood me. And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm in Italy. So I flew from Switzerland to Italy 4 hours in a paragliding wing, and that was pretty fun. So with that being said, that's just everything great in life happens in Italy. So I'm very fond of Italy. So today, when I talk about GraphQL, what we're going to do is I'm going to talk about why I love it, how I've seen it in my work life, and how I think it's going to change every application I write from now on. We're going to create a GraphQL schema, an API endpoint securely, and this will only take a couple of minutes. Then we'll be able to test and query that schema so you can see how it's going to work for your front-end developers. And then once we have, so this is the data that we have. I'm going to use MongoDB, of course, how we're going to get that data, but then I'm going to show how you could extend the data that you actually have access to, both through relationships. So you can relate your data collections to other data through like a foreign key restraint. And then it's going to get really crazy, because then we're going to start accessing not just data we have, but data that exists elsewhere in the world. We're going to use custom resolvers to reach third-party databases and APIs and sort of bring all that information underneath the same schema that you could access through the same API endpoint. And then finally, we're going to build out in a front-end application. That's a whole bunch of stuff. So we'll get cracking. I mentioned that I work for Twitch. At Twitch, we use REST APIs. Most companies use REST APIs, but this was my first experience. I used a lot of them internally. This is my first experience using it externally, because I used to work with game developers and try to get them to understand the API endpoints that Twitch offers for their users and how they can access it to kind of build out different experiences for their games, for instance. So On Twitch, you could have gamers, you would have games, you could hit an endpoint to get the game. And then on that game, you could see everybody who's playing it. And so let's say I get a gamer, like my name was Kilowatt when I was on Twitch. So let's say you find Kilowatt's game, and then you could find that player, and then you could see who follows me or how I follow who I follow. And there's just all sorts of interesting ways to kind of iterate on that data and that endpoint that you get from these different APIs. But the problem is that if you say you get there are a few problems. If you get my name, then you can get my user endpoint. You can see my email, my avatar, who I'm following, what games I'm following, whatever. And we try and give you as much information as possible during that, so you don't have to do lots of back and forth to the server. But the problem is you might only want my name and who I'm following or something like that. So you're getting a lot of information that you might not need. And the nice thing about GraphQL, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is you don't have to ask for all that information that you might not need. You just ask for the information that you want. So Omar, for instance, he might want 20 fields. Giacomo, for instance, he might just want like 2 fields. So Giacomo, we can say you just get whatever you want, and you don't have to bloat up your front end and your users' devices with extra information they don't need. The other problem is that you can underfetch. So that's overfetching if you get too much information, or you can underfetch. So let's say you get information, you get my username, and I have to wait for response, and then I have to go back to the server to get more information. So it's a really nice way of sort of balancing those things. So potential problems with REST APIs, maintaining multiple versions, overfetching, underfetching. Like I said, you could have users, you could have followers. So there are all these different endpoints that you kind of have to know. And the other thing that we had a lot at Twitch was we would often, if we changed any of our endpoints, we'd give a year notice, and we'd send notifications and emails and tweets, and we'd let people know. But people didn't know, or they didn't trust. So anytime, we're like, okay, the change is going to happen, the change would happen and would break their application every time somebody's application break. And they'd often be big applications, and you always kind of work through that. So these are all these sort of problems that we have with REST APIs that get more complicated. I had mentioned, so if you're new to data, or you're new to, I'm sure everybody here is a great developer, but I always like to think about things in terms of food. So I was actually in France over the summer a little bit, and like I said, I love Italian food in general, but sometimes I go and I want kind of a simple breakfast, but you go in these really nice restaurants and you say, I want an apple, and they're like, well, we'll give you a fruit plate. So I get a fruit plate. Or I want a croissant, and they give you a bread basket, because it's decadent. We got to have lots of food. You want a cup of tea or coffee, and they bring you out this whole assortment. And then, if I want, so it's Sunday brunch, if I want like a glass of champagne, they're like, we won't sell them by the glass, but we'll sell a bottle of champagne. And on top of that, you can't even buy it here at your hotel cafe. You have to go to the hotel bar and go get it. So whenever I think of GraphQL, when I was learning GraphQL, I was kind of thinking like, oh, this is me overfetching, and now I have all this information, but I really just want, something really simple like this. So the good thing about GraphQL is you get only the data you want. So let's start with the data. So the data that we're going to use today, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a secure GraphQL endpoint. So here we have in MongoDB, if you guys go to cloudmongodb.com, you could spin up your own free cluster on Google and AWS, on any of the cloud providers. We do this one on Google. And then you can download, you can put up you don't even have to put in a credit card, by the way. But you can download sample data. If you don't have your own data, you could download sample data. So the data that we're going to work with today is sample data that we downloaded. And by the way, I'll share these links at the end, but I actually wrote a tutorial that you can work through, and this is that tutorial. And there's also a GitHub with the code that we're going to show today. So I'll share the links at the end, and you can download them and work through them. But in the sample data that we have customers. And so we have Elizabeth Ray and Lindsay Cohen and Catherine David, and then we have accounts. And so in these customers, for instance, if I go, let's say, her accounts is an array of different types of accounts. So this is like a banking application. So these are the customers. If I go to the account, this is one of Elizabeth Ray's accounts. And then inside of her banking account, you could see that she has, in this particular account, she has 4 different types of investment products. And then there's also transactions, this collection, which we won't use, but we'll stay everything here in the sample analytics banking application. So go back here for a second. So again, we have 2 different collections. They're on the same database, 2 different collections on the same database. Here's one document, a customer document, and you can see how this account is actually related to the account IDs in the accounts collection. So the first thing I want to do is, let me go back over here. I am going to, if I want to create an endpoint so I can access its data, if you're to set up something in GraphQL, then you might have to leverage, another server and put information. It's not terribly hard, but we're going to leverage Realm for this. So Realm is really simply a back-end application that sits on top of your data. That's super easy, and it sort of streamlines all your authentication and rules, and it's a serverless platform. So we can spin this up serverlessly, and it's pretty easy to do. So I'm just going to create a new application. Let's call it we'll call it DevFest. Let's do DevFest Italia. And again, if you go to so this is your Atlas cluster. We have Realm, we have charts. So I just basically, to get where I was, I just clicked Realm, and it brought me to this endpoint. So what I'm going to do is we're going to create a schema, and I'll explain what schema is in a second, on both our accounts collection and our customers collection. But I did say that this is going to be done securely. Everything you do here is very secure. So the first thing I'm going to do is and usually I do this first because I always forget. I'm going to enable authentication. So we have all these different types in Realm that we could integrate with Facebook and Google, and you could integrate with your own custom authentication as well and your own API keys. But for this, I'm just going to do something pretty simple. I'm going to do anonymous. I'm going to enable anonymous authentication, and that way it's just an easy way of you don't have to provide, your user doesn't have to provide a username and password. But let me see if I Authentication Providers. So they don't have to provide a username and password, but every time they log in, they get a unique session ID. And this way, you can kind of tell who's using it. If you wanted to do something more advanced, for instance, in some of your applications, if you want to expose more advanced data, for instance, or more private data, then you can have users log in for that, depending on what level of account they have. But if you want to just get up and going, we'll just do this. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is, so I set up authentication. Now let's go to rules. So inside of, I'm going to do accounts. And I'm going to say, just to make it easy, everybody can read all data. But you can see here we have different templates. So you could say a user can only write their own data, but they could read everything. So it depends on what type of application you have. But we have all these templates, or you can write your own custom template. But for here, just to get going with GraphQL, we'll just say a user can read, you can log in and a user can read everything. So rules, let's see, schema. So I set the rules, how to date it. So I'm going to generate the schema here. So this is going to, the nice thing about doing this in Realm is it's going to analyze the schema in your database and suggest something. It sees all the fields you have, the types of data in the fields, and it's going to suggest this type of schema. This looks pretty good to me. It was a very simple collection. So let's validate it. So it takes a sample of it and suggests it, and then you could run it again and see if anything happens. Now, the nice thing is, even though we're creating a schema here, this does not mean that your applications that use this collection have to use the schema. The schema is only for GraphQL, and it serves as the contract so that anybody who's querying this GraphQL endpoint, can understand the data and the types of data that they're going to get back. It's a contract between maybe the front end and the back end. You know, that review and deploy is going to come up a lot. So let me go ahead and disable drafts here. This isn't that important, but for demo purposes, it kind of is. So I just went ahead. So now if that is done correctly, then I can go to GraphQL. And then here you see, this is a graphical interface. So let me move this down here. And then you can see I created a schema and account. So it already gives me my first account. It's really helpful tips that we give you, but crowds me a little bit. So I'm going to take that out. So this is basically a query that we would have in it. And if I hit that, then you can see that I get the data, some of the data that I'll get back from hitting this GraphQL, from making this GraphQL call. This is the GraphQL endpoint that we have. We generated just like that. And then the nice thing is as well, so here's the data you get back, but you can see that I have, here I have the accounts, and it tells you, for instance, I get query and mutations, and let me see one more thing. And then I see that I can get account if I have one account, or I can get accounts for multiple accounts, and I can do a query input. So let's say I do, the other nice thing is, let's see what I have. And this will also tell you like all the different types of, it helps you, it auto-generates documentation, and it tells you the types of things you can do. So for instance, if I wanted to do accounts, but I wanted to say limit 4, give me 4 different types of accounts, this should work. And then I have 4 different types of accounts. Or if I wanted to do accounts, and let's say I want to do a sort of query filter, so I could say, what is it, products. And so this is going to be an array, and I'm going to say it's a commodity. Hopefully this works. Is that going to work? And probably, let me see, products in, let's see, oh, sorry, yeah, this is wrongly set up, and comma, limit. Let me see if that works better. Yeah. So now I have 4 different accounts, and they all have commodity in it. So the nice thing is that now you have this endpoint, and now you have documentation that your users can use for it. Now that I have that done, let's go back. So I have accounts done. Let's go back and let's create the same thing for customers. Simple it, customers. I'm going to say, again, make it really easy. Users can read all sorts of data here. That's fine. Schema. Let's generate schema. So I have this very long schema, and you see I have this really long field here in a second. Let's say that I like that schema. I don't see a problem with it off the top of my head. So I'm going to run validation. That's fine. But when I try and save it, I have a problem with it. And I could go in and analyze the problem if I want to, but the problem comes from this tier and details field. It changes a lot over all sorts of different documents. And so I can change it, change the data, have a view for it, but I actually don't need to show this field. I have no reason to use this field at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, anytime you want to take a field out, Control A, let's go ahead and remove that. Anytime you want to take a field out, you don't have to expose all your data. So we're going to create a custom configuration where I take that field out. But you could take out any field and you could add it to any types and things like that. So I'll do that. I have no problems with that. Save it, and it works. So again, the schema is simply the fields that you have and what type of data it's expecting, so the front end knows what to expect. So now that we have that and we saved it, if we go back to GraphQL, this back down, take this back out. I'm going to do customer. Let's see if I. So now we can see that customer has shown up there, and I'm going to say I want a customer name, address, email. And so here you see I have this customer, Elizabeth Ray. This is just giving me one random customer. And the nice thing is I have two collections. So if I wanted to do, I have two collections, accounts and customer. So if I wanted to, I can put back in my account and get whatever products in there. And so this is going to show me the account information, the customer information, and then account information if I want. So I'm hitting two different collections, and I'm getting it all in the same roof. And if I wanted to, it's the same GraphQL API endpoint, but I can get as many or as few fields as I want that I've enabled this to. So if I were to go, I showed you how to do a filter on this. But one thing I'm going to show is, oh, I hate that that shows up there. Here you see I have this query variables field. So if I wanted to, my dog is crying. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to show, actually. You can see here I have, let's go back, schema, and I have mutations. So a query is just if I'm trying to get information, and a mutation is if I want to change the data at all. I can create an endpoint. So let's say I can insert an account if I wanted to, and I can replace an account or delete an account or update an account. So if I wanted to, actually, I use this documentation to build something here. So I'm going to do mutation to show. So for instance, I use that documentation to do something like this. So I'm going to create, so I'm going to add this data. So I'm going to insert an account, add all that, and then I'm going to have it return to me this information. Hopefully this will work. Yeah, and so if I go back to my data, let's see if I go back to my data. Here we are in Atlas looking at this data again. So let me see if I can find this. And there you go. So this is what we just created just now. So you can see how fast it was to create an API endpoint, query it, update it, anything you want to do. So the last thing I want to do here before we move on to the front end is I want to do, let's do this one. So I'm going to go back to querying it. Go ahead and move that out. So, but I want to, instead of like adding in, I can have, here I could just have name Jennifer Lawrence or whatever. Jennifer Lawrence is actually in the database. Let's see what happens. Check this out. Oh, I keep misspelling. So I can have Jennifer Lawrence and I have an account. But what I'm going to do here is I don't want to be typing that out every time. So I use the query variables at the bottom. Repaste this, what I had, which I just changed. So if I wanted to, I can put in cust here as my variable for my customer name, and I call it cust for my front end, which is why I use that here. And then I can put in Elizabeth Ray here, or Jennifer Lawrence, or whatever it is. If I have, so I have Elizabeth Ray here. If I run this with Elizabeth Ray in there, then you can see I have this updated to be Elizabeth Ray. So now I have my GraphQL endpoint. Let's go back here to see my application. So now I have, you see how my user is connected to my account IDs. So I have my secure GraphQL endpoint. I set it up with rules and authentication. I leverage Realm for all of this. I have queried and I have tested. So now I can get all my data back. It goes through GraphQL and I can do all these things. But now I have to worry about the front end. Now I have to worry about how am I going to get that data to my user. So in this part, the next two steps I have to do as we build up this application is I'm going to show you simple code that I have that's inside my GitHub. We're going to connect to this GraphQL endpoint that I have, and we're going to connect to the Realm application so my front end knows what to expect. So here is my very simple code that I have. Let's grab my GraphQL endpoint here. And then I'll put this, I do an Axios call here. So I'll, whoops, what did I do? That's not what I want. Oh, probably didn't paste it. Okay, so I have that in there. And then I need to get my app ID. And I need my app ID. You can see my app ID is actually here as well inside my GraphQL endpoint. But because I authenticated with that user, I need to put this, I need to put this here. Hopefully this is correct. That should work, hopefully. And then let's try one more thing. Let me go back here and let's go ahead and grab this. Let's see. Here we go. And so inside, if you guys can just grab that code from there and we can paste it in here real quick. And I show you inside the tutorial that I've written up how you can do that. I don't need the account right now. So I'll go ahead and take that out. And let's see if this works. I get so nervous. So this is my application. I have the code for it, simple HTML application here. I give you all the code for it. But if I were to do for Lawrence, oh, something always goes wrong. Let's see what it says. User action not defined, banking dogs. Client ID. Okay. Let me go back. What line? 2. Oh. Put it on the wrong line. I see something here. Anonymous credential. So maybe, no, that should be okay. So now let's try. And so now you can see I have my user and I have my accounts, and that's all you need to do to integrate. Now that I set my Realm application, I really only had those 2 endpoints. I have to connect to my Realm application and I have to put in my GraphQL endpoint. So So where we were here, now we have that and we've connected to the front end. But if you notice, I have my customer and have accounts, but they're actually not connected yet. So I'm getting a random customer document and I'm getting an accounts document, but I'm not getting my customer's accounts document. They're not connected. In a REST call, you might get the customer, get that data back, and await the response, and then make another call to the server to get more accounts information from it. In this one, we're not going to do that because we can use this to create a relationship. So if I go back to Realm, I'm going to go back to my rules. Do I go back to rules? Yeah, and then I'm going to create a relationship. So inside my customers, I want to relate, remember, I want to relate my customers' accounts. So here's the customer's document. I want to relate this accounts field to the account collection and the account ID field in that collection. So in my relationship, I'm going to say add a relationship. I'm going to do my accounts field inside my customers. I'm going to go to my accounts document, and I'm going to say it needs to be equal to account ID. Now you see, this is what it says. The foreign key, this is the foreign key restraint if we're thinking relationally. So the foreign key is account ID. And then isList is true, which just means that for one customer, I might have many different accounts. So let's go ahead and save this. This looks right. Now let's see what how that affects, that relationship now affects my calls. So if I do this, let's go to customer. We do name, email, address. And then if I do accounts, which was the name of the field, you see that I have an error here. And now the reason is because remember, accounts is no longer just accounts. Accounts is now your account ID. So now I can go ahead and go into my accounts collection, and I remember that I have account ID. I want account ID and products. So if I do, actually, let me put that. So if I do this to get a sample document, here you go. I have my customer, my accounts, and now I can drill down even more. I'm in my customers collection and I go over to accounts collection. That gives me all this extra information. So if I wanted to, let's go ahead and take query, let's see, customer string, yeah. So I'm going to take this. This is the query I'm going to use. So this should bring me back Elizabeth Ray's information. And there's Elizabeth Ray here again. So let's go ahead and grab, I had that. Let's put this in my front end application now. Oops, going the wrong way. This is my front end application. I want to do, let's go ahead and take that out. And let's do, I think this is, let's see what happens. Let me use another guy, another person instead of Elizabeth and Jennifer all the time. So now I have this gentleman and I have his account ID, and I can see how it kind of breaks down and I get more things. And that was really all you had to do. You see your query, you paste it in the front end, and this is what happens. Now, how are we doing on time? 10:21. I don't have a lot of time, I guess. So let me do one last thing. I'm going to book through this really fast. Now I'm going to do, so this is how I get one collection, I connect it to another collection, but now I'm going to go and I'm going to use custom resolvers. So custom resolvers are going to allow me to connect to another database. So I'm going to create a new function here inside of Realm. I'm going to call it, what did I call it? Get dog and joke. Let me save this in my function editor. I'm going to, let's see, actually. So inside, let me grab this code here, put it in my Realm function. So you can see I get this API endpoint, and this is going to return to me a quote and it's going to return to me a quote and a joke or a funny thing to say. And then I'm going to actually add one more thing to it. Let's get this. So that's one API endpoint, and I'm going to get one more API endpoint just for good measure. Let me move this over. Save this. Now I have this function here. This is just a normal function. If you've used Realm for anything, you can create functions, triggers, and functions. I'm just going to run. We have this console at the bottom so you could test it. And so what I want this to return is a quote, an author, and a dog image, which I get. So the last thing I'm going to do here is, now that I have that saved, I'm going to go back to GraphQL. I'm going to create a custom resolver. So this is going to add a new field, and it's going to call that function. So I'm going to call it dog and quote. It's going to be a query. It's going to get dog and you call the function anytime the payload sees, anytime my query sees dog and quote, it's going to call this function to get information back. I don't need input type, but I do need this. So let me see what that is. Get one more thing. And this input type, it has to be JSON, and it has to say what I'm expecting to get back. So I'll put that in, and let's save it. Great. Now if I explore, then you can see that I have get dog and quote here. So it's going to return that for me. And then I'm going to go ahead and combine. Now that I have accounts, I have dog and quote, I have customers. So let's go ahead and replace all of this here. See what happens. So it returns everything here. And then finally, I'm just going to put that in my front end. Now that I have that endpoint, I'm going to undo that. This is the last thing, Omar, I have to do, I promise. Undo that. And you know, just because I was tired of the same people all the time, I actually put in autocomplete functionality in here for fun. So let's see if this works. So what this is going to do is it's going to, so let's see if I have anybody whose name starts with Mar. Okay, so let's do Jennifer Rush. And then now you can see it's any random picture that comes back from that API endpoint. I have her name and email and address, any random quote, and the author that comes back from that endpoint, and all this different information. So this is my way of grabbing MongoDB data or any other type of data, any other third-party databases or anything you want to pull in, all underneath the same schema, generated securely. You get your own authors. We did a whole bunch on that. So this is custom resolvers, other APIs that I can pull in. We set it up serverlessly. It's secure. It's going to scale out when you need it. It does automatic schema generation, validation, and access rules. So in it, I'm going to share these slides with you, but I made references to all these things. So that's all I have.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. Really, we enjoyed your talk.
It's a lot of me talking. I'm really not used to it.
Don't worry. Don't worry. If they couldn't saw some of your parts, they can also always see it on YouTube. That we will upload all these videos. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are kind of strict with the timing, so we are going to cut the Q&A. this time. I'm sorry, really, for all the others. But I will take all the questions that they did it, okay, and I'll send it to you, so you can always answer to them even on wherever they can track you, okay?
Yes.
And
I will share the slides. I will share the
okay.
slides. It has a thorough walkthrough, but and it also has my Twitter, and you guys can just tweet at me and message me, and I'm happy to answer any questions and hear what you guys are working on. So.
Perfect. Then thank you again, Karen, and I hope that everyone enjoyed. I do remind you to all the others that we have the last session then, and that's it. Thank you again. Really.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.